I did an opening keynote in Miami 24 hours before the conference started. I completely lost my voice. So I did 24 hours networking with an iPad and just writing. And people thought I was doing a bit, and I was like, I had no voice. So I rewrote my whole opening keynote, and I said, look, I'll do it Penn and Teller style. And so I just had slides that would guide Christine through. I'd set up a few gags where I said, let's check the live Twitter feed. And Todd Cafflish, a mate of mine, I'd teed him up to do a tweet. And he said, gee, Sean Callanan's killing it. He should speak less in his conferences. And at the end, Tinnis from FanCam, Tinnis LaRue, was taking a 360-degree shot of the whole thing. And he starts taking the photo, and I just get the mic and say, come on, everybody, this is going to be on the internet, smile. And so half the faces are people just with their jaws on the floor like, hang on, have you punked us the whole time? You haven't spoke?
G'day, guys. Coming up on the show today is Sean Callanan. Sean is the founder of Sports Geek, a tech and digital agency that works with the likes of the NFL, amongst many other teams and leagues in Australia and in the US to help commercialise their digital assets. Sean is also the host of the Sports Geek Podcast, which is one of the leading sports business podcasts that's been running for over 10 years now with more than 350 episodes, including, and wait for this, Mark Cuban, billionaire owner of the NBA team, the Dallas Mavericks. Sean was once an IT professional and turned to the sports industry 13 years ago and has made a massive impact on the maturity of the industry regarding all things digital. Let's go.
I started volunteering.
It's all about who you know in sport.
Am I going to be calling the last 10 seconds of the grand final?
You can connect with the interviewer. The hand goes up when they've got to make a decision.
Having a network is one of the most important things you can do.
I didn't necessarily follow my passion. I followed my curiosity.
Once you've worked in sport, there's no going back.
And then lo and behold, before I left, I got offered too.
Hello and welcome to the SportsGrad podcast, the ultimate guide to make it in the sports industry. I'm Ryan Walker. Joining me is the homebody, Ruben Williams, and we are two mates who met at Cricket Australia back in the day. And each week we learn how people made it in sports. We tease out their career decisions, their work habits, skills, and everything that they do that makes them great. Also that you can learn how to get in, get promoted, and get thriving in the sports industry. Rubes, my good friend, we've swapped positions.
G'day Ryan, I'm doing very well, thank you. It's been a very long 6 months. My 6-month travel and work adventure has come to an end. I've been crawling through Asia and Europe and the north part of Africa to finally make it back to Australia because I've just been longing to get into the same podcast room as you. And as soon as I arrive home, you decide it's time to go to Perth. So I've seen you for about all of 2 days this year. And
yes.
Now I'm back in the room all by myself. I'm speaking to you through a screen once again. What is going on?
Yeah, it was a bizarre turn of events. It was quite weird. You got back, well, in meetup mode. We pretty much saw each other 3 days straight for 24 hours, which was quite nice. And then Perth called. It didn't really dawn on me that this was going to happen, but we've essentially just added another few weeks of being apart, and it is quite weird being on the podcast on the road. So I hope you're enjoying the studio because it is quite nice. It's a little more comfier than my old. Well, this wasn't my bedroom, but it's one of the rooms. But yeah, it's good being in Perth. But flat, I'm not there with you because I was looking forward to doing a pod in person. But that might have to wait until 2024, which is a scary thing to say.
That's right. We've learned to live with it, so we'll make do once again. I guess I'll see you at Christmas time or something by the time you get back. But
yeah.
But you are in Perth for a very important reason. That's because the Perth meetup is on tonight, and we just enjoyed 3 amazing meetups last week in Brisbane and in Sydney and in Melbourne, where we had 140 odd people. Sydney set a record again in terms of attendance, and in Brisbane we had an amazing guest in Tom Hickey from the Brisbane 2032 Olympic Committee. So it was wonderful. We haven't done a meetup in a while. I haven't been in the country for a while, so even personally just to get around and meet all these people who are in our community was absolutely fantastic. I think the thing that kind of took my breath away was in Melbourne when we asked, put your hand up if you're a member, and about half the room put their hand up, and I was like, oh my goodness. It's, because we chat to all these people online on Discord, but to actually see them in the one spot in person, it hits different, Ryan.
Mate, 100%. I was thinking about this over the last couple of days, just sort of coming down from such the high that is sort of meetup week. And you're right. It's so unusual seeing everybody in person. And I know you just said there, like, it is unusual, but for us, we're constantly speaking to people digitally, whether that's LinkedIn or in our community on Discord or just a video call or something like that. So when you see people, I don't know about you, but I saw some people that I've never met in person, but I spoke to them. I feel like I've met you before, but I haven't. And it was like we're just mates. Like it was so weird. But you're right. It's like, it is the best thing about what we do, being able to see the people that we speak to online. And you're right, it's seeing so many fresh faces, but also just seeing all the members from the last year. And obviously we've got a lot more members now than we did this time last year. So just being able to see people face to face and actually connect with them was absolutely awesome. So yeah, I'm still on that high from seeing everyone, and we're recording this just before our Perth meetup, and tonight we've got just about 50 RSVP'd, which is just incredible for Perth, where we've only been once before. So yeah, it's just a super exciting time at the moment.
And that number's about to get even bigger, Ryan, because for those who aren't aware, the way that we bring in new members has changed in recent months. No longer can you become a member at any point in time. You have to wait for a specific intake period. Now, those who came to our meetups got the chance to become a member at those events. But tomorrow, our next intake period opens. Tomorrow being Tuesday, the 28th of November, we're going to open up the remainder of the 70 placements available for the SportsGrad community. I believe 12 of them roughly got snapped up at the meetup. So those people who are hungry for a membership got in early, got to the event and put their name down very quickly. So we're accepting 70 members of this intake. So the remaining 58 spots will go live tomorrow. And if you want one of them, then you've got to jump on it straight away. Otherwise, you've got to wait until late February next year, which is months away. So if you don't want to wait for the new year, if you want to get a head start on 2024 and get ahead in your career, tomorrow is the opportunity to jump on it at the crack of dawn, and or the crack of dawn being 9 a.m. And then we are running a very special community speed networking night that evening, so you'll be able to meet all the brand new members straight away.
Yeah, super exciting. And, we describe being a SportsGrad member as your ticket to getting a job in sport. So join tomorrow. There's only limited spots, so get in early. And it's super exciting to welcome so many new people. But speaking of the community, Rubes, we do these updates every week, but I think there's been some great wins lately, which just showcases some of the people inside. So what has been happening for those who might be on the fence thinking about whether they want to join or not?
Yeah, well, funny you mentioned people who you've known for a long time online and on Discord but never met in face. This is one of those people that I've known since 2020. Joseph Strickland, I reckon, was like literally in the first 10 people to ever become a member.
Yeah.
But he was always living down in Tasmania, working for Tennis Australia, based out of Tas. And he's recently got a job at Melbourne Victory as a match operations coordinator. So he's moved up to the big smoke. He's finally in Melbourne. He's got along to a meetup. And when he said to me on Friday night last week, "G'day, Ruben, I'm Joseph Strickland," I'm like, "Oh my gosh, you're the guy."
I did the exact same thing.
So that was a bit of a thrill to finally meet Joe. So well done to you, Joe, on getting the new job and relocating to Melbourne. Fu Chang has just got a role with the Socceroos as an activations volunteer. And Hitan Silwani also joined the customer experience team with Tennis Australia, which is amazing to see. A big summer at the Australian Open coming up for Hitan and a lot of other members who have joined the Oz Open too. In terms of upcoming events, I mentioned tomorrow, speed networking for all the new members, but a bunch of other events coming up as well. For our pro members, we have got a masterclass all about negotiation with none other than Pete Williams. Pete sold the MCG for $1 million in 2004, I believe it was, when he was only just 21 years old. And what I mean by that is when they were doing the renovations on the MCG, particularly the MCC dining room, they threw out the carpet and Pete said, no, I'll have that, give that to me. He cuts it into a whole bunch of squares, puts it on a plaque, sells each plaque for $500 a pop back to the members who want to keep it in their dining room. And that was his first entrepreneurial venture. These days, he's done 5 other businesses and negotiated many a deal, so he's going to come and teach our pro members just exactly how he does it. So a good one for the pro members to get along to. And then if you're looking for another meetup to get along to, well, the dates are out. If you want to come back, you can join us in Feb. So mark this down. Melbourne, Feb 9th, we're back at the Commons. Adelaide, Feb 13. Perth, also Feb 13. We're running concurrent meetups on that date.
The double header.
Brisbane, Feb 14, and then Sydney, Feb 15. So we're going back to back again with the inclusion of Perth and Adelaide on the same day. But if you want to make sure you don't miss out on a single thing that's going on in SportsGrad land, make sure you are on our mailing list. Head to sportsgrad.com.au/newsletter to subscribe. You can also grab a link in our show notes to join.
Amazing. There is just so much happening. I was about to chuck something on the end of that, but I'm not even going to because there's that much happening there. So lots to be involved in, but let's get cracking into this episode. Enjoy this chat with Sean Callanan. Before we jump into the episode, we've got a quick message from our good friends at Deakin University. Deakin has been a huge supporter of SportsGrad since day one. If you're currently studying or you've just finished studying, having a postgrad qualification in sports management on your resume can give you a huge leg up over other potential candidates applying for that same role. So if you want to pump up your resume and get specialised knowledge in sports behaviour, law, marketing, ethics, finance, governance and strategy, take a look at Deakin's postgrad qualifications. Their Master of Business in Sports Management is not one of, but the best one in Australia, ranked at number 1. So add a postgrad to your resume, and that's our tip for the episode.
Sean, welcome to the SportsGrad podcast.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate being here.
Sean, did I ever tell you how I first came across Sports Geek and all the work you're doing?
No, you didn't, but I love hearing the story, so I'll let you open it up.
So it was through an old boss of mine called Scott Kilmartin. Now, he was running an ice cream company at the time, and I was one of his casual scoopers.
Yep.
And we would drive around from weddings to events, and he said, hey, you got to listen to this guy on Sports Geek. And I believe you guys were doing a different podcast together at the time. Was it Beers, Blokes and Business or something like that?
We were. My office used to be above Scott's shop at Hall up in Fitzroy North. That was one of our first offices. And yeah, we did a podcast with a few mates talking about just the trials and tribulations of business while we were having a few beers. And yeah, we did I think we nearly did 100 episodes.
Wow, hey.
Of just sharing our drunken insights on the world of business. But yeah, it's fun.
Were you doing Sports Geek podcast before this other podcast? Or was that the first step into it?
So I was doing Sports Geek podcast now, started about 10 years ago. And because I was enjoying podcasting as a format, and people like myself and Scott and James and Steve Sammartino were catching up and just talking about different things in our businesses. And I was just, well, these should be podcasts. Every conversation should be a podcast. This is valuable to somebody. And so we started doing that podcast, but it became just the wrangling. It's hard enough wrangling one guest, in getting guests sorted. But when you've got 6 or 7 blokes and you're trying to figure out who's going to be on this week and who's going to prep, it became a bit like herding cats, but it was always fun. Yeah.
Well, I heard a stat that I think 99% of podcasts don't make it past 10 episodes. To do 100 of one and let alone 300 of another one is a massive effort. We'll get into more of Sports Geek in just a sec, but we always open our show with a few quickfire questions to help people get to know you a bit better. First one is, what did you study at university?
So at university, I studied Bachelor of Infotech. So it was at Swinburne. So it was computer science, but mixed more with the business side of it. So I always found myself sort of drawn to the computers, but also talking to the people that wanted the computing solution. So we sort of focused on a bit of both. It wasn't pure computer science. So that's sort of where I got my start.
And your first ever job, before you've stepped into your first full-time job, what were you doing before that?
So we were lucky enough with the Bachelor of Infotech. It was a sponsored course, so we actually got some money for rent and beer, which is all you need at uni. And it also came with 2 6-month placements on site. And so I always look at my first job as that first 6-month placement, because effectively they were paying us in uni, and then we did the 6 months. And I was lucky enough to be at Museums Victoria and working at ScienceWorks 3 months before it opened.
Wow.
So it was pretty cool in setting up some of the multimedia displays, and this was early technology on touchscreens. So there were like little films registering the dots of where you were pressing and those kind of things. It wasn't anything like we've got now with iPads and everything. And so it was testing the content that we were putting on those screens, and then watching from afar the kids just smashing the hell out of these computers and seeing what would survive. So that was I really enjoyed that, because it was like 3 months before the museum opened. You're setting up a lot of things. You're setting up computers, making sure that they're working, but then also testing the programs that were written. And it was pretty rudimentary when we're looking at some of the multimedia and activations that we see in galleries and museums and sports stadiums these days. But it was really bleeding edge at that time. It was a lot of fun.
And science work is a staple of any primary school excursion these days. So it'd be pretty cool to have a founding role in how it got set up.
Yeah. So then there was some sports activations added there. The running against Kathy Freeman, and the screen would line up and see how fast you could go over 20 metres, those kind of things. So again, the same sort of thing, watching primary school groups trying to run and then smashing themselves into the padded wall at the end. But yeah, it was sort of that first piece of like interactive museums, sort of taking museums to the next level, and not just wandering around looking at dinosaurs and stuffed animals and a little bit boring, trying to make it a bit more interactive. So it was sort of, I guess, a precursor to a lot of the stuff we're doing in the sports digital space of, hey, how do we make it more interactive and fun?
And your favourite sporting moment of all time?
Well, it's pretty tough because Collingwood fan, I'm just coming off a 2023 grand final, and that was what was pretty special. But I think 2010 was also pretty special. But I'm also lucky enough to having a few teams that have done well, and I was a big fan of the Melbourne Tigers way back in the day in the early 90s. And it was funny. I was part of a cheer squad effectively in my 20s in the uni, and we were the Tigers hoodlums. So if you ever went to a Tigers Magic or a Tigers Giants game and the wave got started and there was some yahoos in the audience, that was me and my mates sort of doing fan engagement before fan engagement existed. So it was pretty cool tagging along with Andrew Gaze and Leonard Copeland and everyone in that team, both on the court and then following Copes into the nightclubs in different parts of around Australia. So it was always fun. So fond memories of that 93 championship. We weren't fortunate enough to be in Perth when they won, but we were definitely around all the celebrations.
Were you guys on par with some of the European ultra fans, or a bit more tame?
Oh no, we did our best. We once. We did some things. We had Isaac Burton, who was a Sydney Kings player at the time, and had been accused of point shaving in NCAA. So we thought we would go with that. And it was back in the day when you would pay your rent to a real estate agent in cash. And so one of the guys actually had his rent money in his pocket, like $1,000. And so we were waving like $1,000 at him when he was at the free throw line, asking if he would miss a shot for us. So we had a few of those. We had a few times where Lindsay told us off for giving it to a player, and then the players just started loading us up. But we probably had more wins than we had losses, so it was always fun.
Awesome. And do you have a favourite interview question that you like to ask of candidates coming to work for Sports Geek?
From an interview question for candidates, I thought it was an interview question from a podcast point of view.
We can go with that if you want.
I always open with, how do people get into sports?
Yep.
Because it's a bit like you, and you're probably doing the same when you're doing conversations. Like if I'm talking to a commissioner of an NCAA conference, or someone who's now a CMO, or someone's just driving, running the socials, it's like, how did you get in? And so that I always find that interesting when you're talking to someone that is, now a CTO or driving all the data and analytics for an NHL team. Like, no, I was setting up, tents, and I wore the costume for the mascot at halftime. Those kind of things. So those starts and forays in, whether it's through volunteering or that. So I'm always interested in that, to sort of find the steps that people go, whether they're in a single org and sort of working their way up, or working across departments, or the other way of sort of bouncing from team to team or sport to sport and sort of taking learnings from that. So I normally open up most of my conversation from a podcast point of view in that way. If I'm interviewing someone or if someone's asking me to help interview someone, and normally I'm consulted on things on digital, it's normally asking people what they do on their own channels to understand and test and know how to do things. It's always a bit of a red flag for me when someone says, "Oh, I want to, run digital, or I want to be on the tools for a big account or a team," but they're not trying things on their own account or a couple of burner accounts to say, "Oh, this is how you do it." There's nothing worse than saying it's all theory, and then here you go, you're managing an NFL account or you're running an AFL club account, and it's like, well, when are you testing it then? So it doesn't mean you have to be a creator and have your own audience. Like I saw ABC currently is trying to recruit some creators to become sort of digital journalists, and they're asking them to have following, and effectively they're really asking for influencers to come in. But really, you don't need to have a large following to be able to test what are the best content types for TikTok, or you're watching someone and how do they do that, and doing that yourself. Because if you're doing it for the first time on a brand or a team account, the stakes are a little bit higher, and you don't, you're not quite getting it. So it's always a bit of a red flag. Oh, I don't really use, I don't really use Facebook that much. That's just for mum and dad. It's like, well, that's where 80% of your audience is. So you've got to at least still be there to understand what's working. So that's probably the question that I sort of dig in a little bit to say, are you using it? What are you observing? Can you understand what teams are doing and what they're doing behind it? It's probably
that was a massive thing for us in recruiting a recent intern called V, and she's doing some stuff on TikTok. And you look at her own personal TikTok, and she's posting every single day. And I think you're right. It's important that people have an outlet before they jump into something with a bit more stakes. Do you have a favourite book or podcast that's helped you with any part of what you do?
The book I most recommend is Phil Knight's Shoe Dog. I know I'm an Audible book listener. I think I've listened to that, probably once a year since I was, a couple of times now. Just the journey of, where Nike came from, and the struggles that he had early on. When you see the behemoth that it is now, it's quite inspiring as someone who runs their own business, but also, I find that side of the stories fascinating. It's a really good read, and if you're listening now and you're wearing Nikes, I highly recommend giving it a read. So that's one that I recommend a lot. The other one that I do recommend a lot is Tim Ferriss interviewing Arnold Schwarzenegger. Again, and you can read Arnold's book as well. Like it's fascinating. The fact that he was a millionaire even before he became a movie star, effectively selling health, DVDs and fitness programs and stuff like that. That was a 3-hour pod, and I was just on a walk, and I just kept walking. Like I think I did 3 laps of the MCG and a lap of the Tan while I was listening to it, because I just went, I want to keep listening to this. So they're a couple of my go-tos if people say what to listen to.
I'm a big Tim Ferriss listener, so I'll have to find the one for sure. And finally, if you had 30 minutes to pick the brain of anybody, who would it be and why?
Well, initially it would have been Mark Cuban, who's the owner of the Mavs. But I was lucky enough to get him on my podcast with a bit of persistence. I think probably I really like what Matt Ishbia is doing at the Phoenix Suns in trying to change things. I think Adam Silver, I'd love to have a chat with Adam Silver, the commissioner of the NBA. I think they would probably, and then I'm a Detroit Pistons Bad Boys fan, so Isaiah Thomas is still on my list on one I'll probably be careful on going full fanboy. But again, I would like to sort of have a chat to him about the psychology of being an athlete, and then being in that early part of athlete, entrepreneur, player rights, because he was a lot part of the Players Association, and then sort of moving into coaching and what it looks like post. I think the post, like the second chapter for athletes, is a really interesting story, and we can see some of the successes, and there's a lot of fails. So it's sort of like, what are the pitfalls and how do you avoid it, and how do you set yourself up?
Yep, fantastic. I do want to touch on how you got Mark Cuban on the podcast, because that was very early on in the piece. But before we dive into that, tell us a bit about your background, because you did this degree in IT and computer science. How did your career transpire in the early days before Sports Geek started?
So I did a Bachelor of IT, and that sort of gave me skill set in coding but also understanding all the bolts and the Lego blocks that is computer science, but then also be able to talk to people to say, hey, what problem do you want solved, and be able to talk to the geeks. And so that's always been my skill in sort of translating, the normals to the geeks, the hardcore in the little room with no light and they code away. And a lot of them are super talented, but they don't have the EQ and the ability to understand the requirements and talk to business. So I sort of found myself in that space. My first job was training people in a product called Power Builder. I was 21. I hadn't coded it at all, but I was given all the material, and I was training people who'd been programming in other languages, and sort of like that's the thing in computers. There's always these waves of tech that comes through, and you sort of just jump on that wave and run it as hard as you can. I got some really good advice from my boss then, because I was a 21-year-old and 3 weeks out of uni, I was training people in this product. And he just said, look, and there was a bit of imposter syndrome. It's like, how am I teaching? There's someone that's been doing coding for 10 years in other languages. He goes, look, they don't know the language you're teaching. You're 4 pages in front of them. As long as you keep doing that. And he said, don't tell anyone you're 21 because you don't look 21. And so I ended up doing about 40 5-day courses in the first year. And so I became effectively an expert in that product because I'd known the manual and all the content front to back. And so it gave me a lot of confidence in speaking and presenting. I think it's probably in my genes. My dad and a lot of my family are school teachers, so it wasn't a problem standing up there. And so then I was a coder developer in Power Builder for a fair while in multiple industries, and then did the same sort of jump from one tech to another tech. Then it was .NET. Then it was, Apple was coming along. But I was sort of getting to the, and I was ended up by, managing teams. I was running the app team at AGL, the big energy company. I did some projects for Jupiter's in the casinos and building out systems that told them how much money they were making. So I was, doing a lot of building of things, but was really just sort of looking to the side and saying, how can I do some stuff in sport? I wanted to do some stuff in sport, having some stuff that I did with the Melbourne Tigers in being a fan and being part of game entertainment committees and sort of understanding those kind of things. And I was just a frustrated sports fan. Websites that didn't really talk to us, emails that were sent out to everybody and weren't really talking to me as a fan. And so initially when I sort of finished up my last job, I said, I want to give this thing a crack. I sort of didn't even have a name for it. And I thought I would be doing my IT thing in sport. So helping them understand their database, helping them build better websites, doing more of the tech stuff. And in Australia, at least, there wasn't a lot of capacity in that space. A lot of it was, done by headquarters. All the AFL websites are done by the AFL or done by a provider for the AFL. So there wasn't much leeway. And the same in the NRL and a bunch of the different sports. And then social media was sort of on the rise. Facebook was gaining traction. Instagram was doing the same, and so was early Twitter. And there was a little bit of how do we use this? And the pro teams in the States, sort of as they are, sort of leading the way and sort of have a bit more runway to test and learn on things. So they were starting to do stuff, and I went, this is sort of a space. And I just started looking around and looking at AFL teams and NRL teams, and they were starting to use all the platforms. And I just started saying, well, I think you should do it this way. And so it was a mix of me taking the position of a fan. This is what I want as a Collingwood fan or a Pistons fan or a fan of Australian cricket. This is what I want to be able to get. But then also sort of predicting and seeing what was happening in the tech and what they were doing and trying to predict what they were doing in the tech. So whether, hey, this is what's working on Facebook, why don't we do more of that? And so when I started Sports Geek, there wasn't any. And there wasn't any, sports digital people. There wasn't any social media coordinators. So I joke that Jeremy McPeak, a mate of mine, was at the Phoenix Suns, and his Twitter handle was Suns Webmaster because he was the guy that was updating the website. And the same, Jonathan Bernard, who's now at the AFL, he was at Collingwood, and he was the guy that was keeping the website up and running and then making sure some, posts were happening. So early on, I was sort of, banging the drum of this is how I think you should do it. These are my thoughts, and here's what the Boston Celtics are doing. Here's what the Lakers are doing. Here's what Real Madrid's doing. And so I found myself in that space of effectively being a chief digital officer on call for a bunch of different teams and sort of filling that gap, both from a skill and knowledge gap, and then training up the teams, and then having that conversation, say, see, this stuff's working. We actually need people to do that, be dedicated to it. So, I remember having a conversation with the Manly Sea Eagles CEO saying, Jess is doing a great job, but Jess was the receptionist at the time. And I was telling her to leave the desk and go and take photos at training because that's what people wanted, and it was working well. And so we had to say, well, no, we don't want Jess to be answering phones because she can talk to 40,000 fans over here. And then 12 months later, she's tweeting and posting from a grand final win. So it was those early days were really fun, and that's sort of how that transition happened. And I think a mix of my tech knowledge in understanding, even connecting things and doing simple things like, hey, what if we put the like button on that page and people can click it more and then you get more fans? And I still had enough knowledge of web and tech to be able to go, let me in the back end and I'll put that like button on your home screen and just tell people to go there and boom, your lights go up. So there was a bit of, what is this wizardry? Because there wasn't a high skill set of tech and being able to make web changes and those kind of things. And so some of it we just sort of pushed our way through and did it, asked for forgiveness later. But so that's sort of that's where some of that early work happened.
And did you phase into running your own business, or did you quit and go all in at once? How did that transition look?
So I quit my last job and I had some runway and to be able to give it a go. Then it was all me and it was blogging and going blogging when that was a thing. It's no longer a thing.
Did you have a client lined up when you quit, or just make it work?
No, it was a bit of a I finished up my last job running a development team and I was just I didn't had no desire to go and look for another job in that space. I could have, and it was one of the things that was probably prevented me going into sport earlier. Like I'd done some sport side gigs. I'd done I'd run some tours to the States with some clubs. Did a TV show with the Western Bulldogs on Channel 31. Did a data project with the Mountain West with a friend of mine. So we sort of dabbled in stuff, but I was in IT and it was paying far too well. And he was a lawyer and it was paying far too well. And we never made the leap. And so when I finally did, I said, I've got to break free. I could easily just go back and get a contracted job and don't worry about money and stuff. So it was a bit of tighten the belt and start again from scratch. And then it was, landing, one client. So Collingwood, luckily enough, was one of my first clients. And as a Collingwood person, I just went, hey guys, you keep saying you've got 1 million fans, but you've only got 50,000 on Facebook. Like, what's that about? I said, you should have more. And this was August-ish 2010. I said, look, if you do what I tell you to do, I guarantee you'll double it by grand final day. And they said, okay. And we just sort of tested and tweaked what we did. And it was really early rudimentary stuff of, because they were pretty much using the post, and a lot of teams were of just here's the article, just putting up the article and telling people there's an article. I said, how about you sort of, since that time we've come up with the term digital face paint. We want the fans to be able to show that they're a fan of the team in the same way that you put face paint when you're on a game. And so it's like that is giving them content that they can share and show that they're a fan. And so one of the things at that time, and it's still relative now, but at that time, Facebook wanted their feeds to be less text. Because if you remember in 2009, 2010, you would write, I'm feeling good, I'm getting a bagel. Like people would just write text and it didn't have much colour. And so they were like, we want more colour. And so it was like, how about we just, give them a picture? And so it was something as simple as, picture of Alan Diadak and then changing the copy to say, do do you like Did's chances kicking a goal this weekend? And as a Collingwood fan, the mentality of them, I can't not click like on that because I think Dids will kick a goal and get around it. And so we really lent into that. Like that's since been banned or shunned by the algorithm. But at that time, that was the thing. And so we're like, we're playing so-and-so today, click like if you think we're going to win. It's like, well, I have to click like, otherwise I'm not doing my job. And so that fueled the growth. High impact pitches, celebrating the big moments, a lot of the stuff that's still very relevant now, and it fueled that growth. Yes, they had 2 grand finals, that did help, but yeah, they got to 100,000, at the grand, during that week between the grand final and the second grand final. So it was a bit of a, hey, he knows what he's talking about, and some of these tactics, can help, and then, so then that sort of led to few other clients coming on board, asking the same sort of things and sort of giving them some direction.
So your first ever offering was, offering a service as a fractional chief digital officer?
Yeah, effectively, yeah.
How did your offering develop? Because that's 13 years ago or something now.
That is, yeah. So, I mean, that was a pretty big part of like phase 1 of what I was doing, whether it be helping skill up a team and sort of being embedded in the team and being a sounding board. I think it was a trailblazer. I was using GoToMeeting way before people were doing Zooms. But again, I never turned the camera on. Like I worked with the guys at the West Coast Eagles for a couple of years, and we never turned the camera on. We were just like sharing screens and was going through stuff because it wasn't as natural as it is now. So I would have those regular catch-ups, whether it be, hey, we've got this campaign coming up, or how do we best do this, or what do you think we should do for this content? So it was a lot of content brainstorming and developing those pieces. And then over time, as the capacity of digital teams rose, the need for that didn't. And I guess it was probably a bit of a reset around COVID when a lot of things got stopped. So now we're more campaign and commercial focused. So over the years, sort of working with teams and reviewing what they're doing, and then trying to build out that commercial case, we've built out digital to dollars, which helps a team or a brand better understand how they can commercialise what they're doing in the digital space. And so that's knowing your audience, knowing your content, knowing your distribution, knowing the channels, then knowing the value. So what's the value of this if I put a logo on it? What's the value of this if I'm doing a content series for someone? And then how to pitch it. And so that's trying to get the data folk that know who everyone is, and that's improving all the time. The digital folk that are creating the content, getting them together, but then also the commercial folk and understanding that they need to be connected. And so sometimes I joke that I'm a digital divorce counsellor because the digital team will be doing one thing and the commercial team will be doing another thing, and they're not connected. Either the commercial team does a deal and they tell the digital team to do it, or the digital team's doing really, really, really cool stuff and they're not telling the commercial team. And so it's like, guys, we've got to work together on that to say, hey, you want to do really cool things in digital, make sure your commercial team knows, and how you frame it to a partner means that more funds will flow back into digital. So it's a bit of, that's where I play a lot now in helping people better understand that piece and better justify, hey, we need to do this content series to warm up the fans, so they recognise your logo, recognise you're a supporter of the team or the code or the sport. So when you do the campaign that says, we want to capture data or we want to drive people to, do things, then that'll work. And trying to get those two things aligned, because if you just do the, really cold intro of here's the sponsor, here's the campaign, and expect all the fans just to run across and go thank you, it doesn't quite work if you haven't built up some equity with the fans. So it's sort of getting that piece right. Yeah. And you mentioned digital to dollars. Is that what you call your sort of methodology? Effectively. If I was as good a writer as I'm a podcaster, I would have written the book by now, but I haven't. It's all right. You got AI. I can transcribe it for you. It's getting close. Just speak the book. It's getting close there. I have spoke the book in I've done a podcast series sort of reviewing them all. But it is. It's effectively, if someone says, can you come and help us review what do we do in our socials, I can plug that into digital to dollar and say, yes, I can look at your socials and look at it from that point of view, but do you really know your audience, and what data do you have on your audience, and then also what data don't you realise you have? Like, what does Meta know about your audience? What does Twitter know about your audience? Whether they share it or not is another thing. But like trying to get what those personas look like is really important. And then also just getting the digital team and the creatives who, I love them, but sometimes they just do content because they think it's cool or they want to do it or they've seen someone else do it. But it's like, why are you doing it? Who are you doing it for? It's really important. And then it's also super important from your commercial team. It's like, oh, this content's going to go bananas with this type of fan. Which partner best fits for that? And so that's the bit that I think I open up some of the eyes from the digital folk, but then also help the commercial team to go, there is value here. So, for a lot of the time, I was stopping digital folk stopping the commercial folk giving away the digital for free. It's like, it's easy to do it. So, well, no, it's not. There's people building that, and there's actually, we can track it with data. We know how many people, and it's, even more effective. It might be more effective than an LED around a stadium, or it might be more effective than, an outdoor media campaign. And so helping them understand, valuing, a digital campaign versus a logo on the shorts is sort of something that's still improving.
Is there one bit of low-hanging fruit that you see most clubs or leagues have readily available to action when you talk to them?
Most of the time when we're doing a review of sort of content, I say, can we have the commercial team in there as well? And so once the digital team gets sort of reviews all the content, I just say, hey, start. What happened Monday? If you're in a weekly type sport, what happens Monday? The day after the game, and then what do you do Tuesday? And what do you do Wednesday? And they just start telling you what they're doing in their content plan, and then you go through and go, does that perform really, really well? Oh, yeah, it does. And sometimes you'll see the commercial person at the other end of the table looking at that bit of content, looking at the stats and smacking their head and going, oh, my goodness. So some of the stuff is the logo slap, high engagement. Hey, we should have a partner with that. But that's probably easy. But then the other piece is having the conversations with your partners to actually know what they want. And so, lucky enough to work with a bunch of digital folk who've been in sport, and then they go, oh, gee, sport's hard. Long hours, long weekends, and that. And so they can get burnt out. And they go, I'm thinking about going to a brand. I'm like, that's fine, but it's really hard work. You think it's hard work in sport? It's hard work in a different way in brand, because no one likes a bank post or a retailer. Like it's not Buddy Franklin running down the wing or a LeBron James dunk or a Steph Curry 3. Like you don't have the excitement that's
no affiliation to Magellan or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. So it's really tough. And so I think it's not necessarily low-hanging fruit, but I think it's a real opportunity to get the smart digifolk that know what works for your fans and helping them understand, and then saying, hey, sponsor X, we would like to do this kind of series, and then also starting to decide, where does that live? Like, does it live on your channels, or are you producing content for their channels to sort of show the relationship, and potentially move some audiences in some cases. So it's those kind of things where I think if you can get the ideas people, and whether they're in the digital people, into that conversation earlier, and this is the part where lawyers get in the way, or get some of those deliverables that are in the contract, have a little bit more flexibility, you can come up with some really good outcomes.
You mentioned several stages of that digital to dollars process. Is there any particular stage that you think sports don't pay enough attention to?
I think the crunch at the moment is reporting that value and reporting, hey, this was successful. I think for me, 95% of it is understanding their goals and just focusing on that. But we're moving into, so I think that works 90% of the time. But more and more sponsors are now in media buying, eyeballs, impressions game, and they can get in front of your fans without you quite easily by just buying the media and I want to get in front of these folk. And so you need to be you're never gonna win the dollars race against programmatic and those kind of things. So you need to say, well, you can do that. You can target Geelong fans or you can target Golden State fans, but it's not going to be the same as if it's with our IP and so getting some getting some science, but then being able to report it. Like you want to make the person, you know, the sponsorship rep, or whoever you're working with, their job easier to say, oh, this was a big win. And they want it to be a big win. They've signed the deal. They want it to succeed. And so part of it is, you know, what do they want in their reports? What is their main focus? You know, if they're a car dealership, well, they want to sell cars. How we helped you sell cars? Because you can tell them, oh, look, 1.5 million people saw it. It's like, well, but if 800,000 were in India, you're not going to sell cars that way. So it's like, again, and that's the piece where sometimes that's where that disconnect happens. Like the commercial person might know really intimately what is required or what is the key outcomes. But if the brief that gets to digital gets filtered down or doesn't have that as something key, then it's like, well, hang on, that's, you know, they missed the mark. It's just because of the lack of communication. So getting that brief, you know, from the sponsor and from commercial, but then making sure digital is at least aware of what exactly they want. And so a lot of the times we have this, you know, simplified one-page pitch. You know, who's it for? Who's their target audience? Why do they want it? What's their best? You know, what's the outcome? And so then at least there's this common language that digital and the commercial team are working towards, so you can understand it. And I think that's the opportunity that the savvy digital folk having that commercial focus, either, you know, watching what other teams are doing or watching what other leagues are doing or seeing how they're activating, like that's really valuable. For any sports org.
And you're absolutely right, because the account manager on the brand side, they've got to report up into their general manager, or, you know, if it's a general manager saying this is a great sponsorship, they're going to the CEO. So if you can make them look like a hero, then you're going to come back again and again.
Yeah, exactly.
How long did it take for you to get to a point where you could clearly see like this start to end process for the digital to dollars methodology and think, okay, I can really put it into, you know, step 1, 2, 3, 4?
Yeah, it did just evolve from my regular meetings with my regular sort of retainer clients, and, you know, we would have a session on data, and then we would have a lot of the sessions on what should the content be. We're going to tackle this platform. How are we going to tackle Instagram? How are we going to tackle, you know, what's our Snapchat strategy for a short moment? How should we tackle TikTok? Those kind of things. And so giving it some of those guardrails helped. And then the other piece was that value piece. How do I value it? And early on, there wasn't many tools. There's more tools available now that can sort of give you some relevant comparison metric that says, oh, this is impressions, so here's the media value and those kind of things. So it's talking in the language the commercial folk are doing. But it was also trying to just get that story and help the digital folk and the commercial folk tell that story on why that succeeded. And then also reframing that pitch a little bit. So I think over the past 10 or 12 years, the commercial pitch of here's what you can get, and it's this standard deck that goes out to everyone. It's like, well, now there's a bit more customization, but having them better understand what is a digital campaign and what is it actually worth is really important. Like I talked about the short sponsor. I had one client that sold a short sponsor for hundreds of thousands of dollars, and then there was a digital campaign component sort of attached that was sort of put on there as $50K. And then when I went through and said, hey, we ran this campaign and we secured X many sign-ups for this energy company, did you ask them what that's worth? And so you've got to be very careful because the savvy, if I'm on the sponsor side, I would just ask for the digital, right? Because it's just, I'm a leads-based business. I just want leads, and I know I'm getting $500 every time someone signs up. If you give me 1,000, tick, I'm on my way. And so there's that piece of how does a commercial folks sell that appropriately, but then also value that appropriately. So you don't want to lose the short sponsorship money, but you want to appropriately, value the digital. So that piece has always been a bit that's interesting to me, and getting more internal champions in an org that understand that digital and that valuation piece to help the digital literacy, in the commercial team, at board level that don't quite know, hey, why have we got all these people running around capturing all this content? It's like getting that that literacy across the organisation helps.
Amazing. It's fascinating to hear about how your curriculum of such has kind of come together and how it's going to help you in the different things you do. The other one I want to talk about is your podcast, because that's been around for 10 years and it was probably the first sports business podcast that I heard of. You've done, over 350 episodes. Tell us about how that got started and how that's evolved over the last decade.
Yeah, so as I said early on, blogging was the thing, and it was a real struggle for me. All the people who are now writing with AI, it's hard without AI. And I was doing a couple of regular radio spots. I was doing SEN with Daniel Hufford and sort of just talking about sports and sports business. And then I was also doing early mornings at ABC Grandstand with Francis Leach. And so I started teeing up people that I'd met. So luckily, early Sports Geek, I was able to get some good speaking gigs and connect with some conferences. So I was meeting people when I was in the States and things like that. And so I started setting up interviews, and I would do a 10 or 15 minute interview with someone in the States about ticketing or digital and those kind of things. And I was really enjoying them. And I was effectively just putting up those radio clips individually. And they were just, no one was, following up with them. And I went to a podcast movement in the States, and from there I just said, look, I'll make it more, I'll produce it like a podcast. So what I ended up doing was stitching. I'll do an intro, and then I'll do there's a segment with Half, and then there was here's my short interview on Grandstand, and so I started stitching them together, doing it myself, doing it in GarageBand. I tell people to go back and listen to my first couple of episodes because they're terrible, and your first ones are.
Yeah, ours are the same.
And so I think I did the editing for the first 100, and I can't remember how long it was doing it because I kept sort of coming back to the same sort of guests, like I'm in a digital space, so I was just inviting mates from NBA teams and that onto Francis's show at early Saturday morning, and Francis says, oh, look, these are good, but we can't just keep doing the same thing all the time. And I said, well, that's what I want to do. And so I stopped doing the radio bits and just started doing the interviews over Skype with people I knew. And again, it was partly, learning about what they're doing in different parts, and effectively, being a marketing channel for Sports Geek, because I'd have people either call me up and say, hey, ready to go. I'm like, that's great. Who's this? And they're like, they've been listening to the podcast for 30 episodes and they've already gone and convinced their boss can we get Sean in to help us with digital? I'm like, oh, that's awesome. So it sort of worked well in getting my name out there. People, people, after you've done the wrangling to book it in, people don't mind having a chat about themselves and getting a pat on the back. And so it sort of worked out quite well from there, and do 30 to 40 episodes a year and continue on. And again, I guess the bit that's been both humbling and pretty cool is to have, people reach out and say, hey, I listen to the podcast. So I remember Richard Clark, who ran digital for Arsenal, sending me an email and giving me some notes on, hey, I think you should do this to clean up the audio and do that. And I'm like, one, it's pretty cool that he's from Arsenal and he's listening. And he's been a podcast. He's a mate of mine now, and so that kind of thing has been pretty.
I've just done a trip over to Europe, and on that trip I stayed with the guest on our podcast who was episode number 16. His name's Garth Tow and works at the Olympics. Have there been any relationships you've developed through the podcast over the journey that have helped you out in weird and wonderful ways?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's sort of a mix of both the podcast and speaking. So I think I was lucky enough to speak at a conference in 2010 where I was sort of helping promote the conference, and Simon, who was running the conference, didn't know what social media was. I said, look, I'll tweet out about it and do some things. And then I said, well, how about I also speak about social media trends and things like that. And so I was the only Australian speaker on the bill. It was my first speaking gig as Sports Geek. But it was really good because Ted Johnson from the Minnesota Timberwolves was there, Dan Harbison from Portland Trailblazers, Paul Barber from Vancouver Whitecaps. And so it was. So we did a Sydney one and then one in Auckland. So I made really close connections with all of those people. Kirsten Corio, who was at the NBA at the time, and one of the other people was Christine Stoffel, who was founder of Seat Conference. And so after I got off stage, that was terrific, Sean. You should come speak at my conference in LA. I said, yeah, good. Of course I will. And sort of out of that, both that conference and out of that relationships, we end up doing a digital loyalty program for the Minnesota Timberwolves. And so the next draft, I'm in Minnesota, and we built this program with some guys in Melbourne that was effectively, it was too early, but it was, if you tweet more, you get more points. If you like us, you get more points. So it was all that social gamification stuff.
Is this peak Dirk Nowitzki period?
Yeah, Dirk was doing all right then. So 2011, and yeah, so I pitched that to Ted. I said, "Hey Ted, I would love to do this with you guys." He said, "Yeah, let's try it." And we did it at the draft. And so since I was in Minnesota, I cheekily said to Christina, I'm going to be in Minnesota and I'm going to be in LA coming back. And she said, "Oh, great, come to seat in LA and speak on a panel. We'd love to have you there." And so I was really fortunate to seat at that time was a conference around all the geeks, all the chief technical officers, all the CTOs, and they were talking about how do we get Wi-Fi into stadiums and all of those kind of things, which are really geeky. And because I come from a geek background, I can still talk geek. But I was there talking about the digital marketing side, and Shane Harmon, who was a marketing manager for the Rugby World Cup at that stage, he's just finishing up at Sky Stadium as the CEO. He was on the same panel, and we're talking about, hey guys, if you guys get Wi-Fi, guess what happens? Everyone can now connect, and everyone will be sharing that they're in the stadium. So you guys have to sort out the Wi-Fi. And so that formed a really good relationship with Christine, where I kept coming back every year to seat, and I said, we really need the digital folk and we need the data folk there, because they're the ones that use all the tech that gets rolled out. And so it was a really good connection for me, but also networking wise, and open up a lot of doors, and a big part of my podcast roster of people I've met at Seat, and so it's really great that post-COVID Josh Barney was able to reboot it and was in Utah this year, and so it's one of my favourite reasons to go to the States.
So that's almost been 10 years of going to this same conference every year.
Yeah, so I've had some fun times there. I did an opening keynote in Miami after travelling for 35 hours to get to Miami, and 24 hours before the conference started, and I was meant to do the opening keynote with Christine. I completely lost my voice.
Oh no,
lost my voice. So I did.
That happened to me at a meetup one year. It's shocking.
So I did 24 hours networking with an iPad and just writing, and people thought I was doing a bit, and I was like, I had no voice. So I rewrote my whole opening keynote, and I said, look, I'll do it Penn and Teller style. And so I just had slides that would guide Christine through. And I said, sorry, I can't speak. I sound like this guy, and had a picture of Hugh Jackman. And I'd set up a few gags where I said, let's check the live Twitter feed. And Todd Cafflish, a mate of mine, I'd teed him up to do a tweet. And he said, gee, Sean Callanan's killing it. He should speak less in his conferences. And then I had the next slide. I said, thanks, Todd. You never know what you'll get in a live Twitter feed. And it was funny because it was all staged, but everyone's like, how did you integrate the Twitter feed to your keynote? And I'm like, guys, come on. Right? And it was funny because at the end, just before stood on stage, my voice started coming back, but I said, there's no way it's going to hold up for 45 minutes. And at the end, Tinnis from FanCam, Tinnis LaRue, was taking a 360-degree shot of the whole thing. And so I teed it up. I said, here's Tinnis. He's South African. He's got a weird accent as well. And then he goes, it's going to take us 2 minutes. I'm like, I haven't got any slides for 2 minutes of you taking a photo. And so he starts taking the photo, and it's one of those 360 you can zoom in and out. And he starts taking the photo, and I just get the mic and say, come on, everybody, this is going to be on the internet, smile. And so half the faces are people just with their jaws on the floor like, hang on, have you punked us the whole time? You never spoke. So it was quite funny. My voice came back, and and then I did a panel at that one with Richard Clark from Arsenal, Oscar from Real Madrid, and Kevin Cote from the Warriors, who had all been on the podcast, and it was a really good, backwards and forwards. So, yeah, Seat's always been fun times and always good to catch up with you.
Am I correct in thinking you've done some stand-up comedy in the past?
Yes, I did. So a lot of the success of that. No voice keynote was me doing improv. I'd done improv before, and so I'd been able to think on my feet and come up with stuff. And so a lot of what I do is it's probably a skill, but it's also I rely on it too much.
When did you learn improv?
Probably early when I was doing Sports Geek, sort of doing different things. So it was like 2009, 2011. I was doing different classes.
Just for the hell of it, or
just just for trying to do different things and getting out of my head. And so Melbourne Impro do some really good intro courses on spontaneity and building up narrative and supporting your partner and stuff like that. It was quite funny. Heritier, it was Harry at the time. Heritier Lumumba was a Collingwood player, and he was sort of one of those early social media pioneers of being really early. And so I'd sort of reached out to him and said, "Hey mate, you should do this and not do this." And he said, "Yeah, no worries." And then I said, "Oh, sorry mate, I've got to go. I was having a coffee. I've got to go to Impro." And he's a bit the same, of really open and looking to explore. And so, the next term he did a spontaneity course with us, and we're like Channel 7 came in and we're playing Scarecrow Tiggy on Channel 7 at half time. So that was a good sort of, if you don't know, if you're not good at thinking on your feet and, handling questions, like I can't recommend doing improv course enough. Like it's really good at, getting out of your head and, someone throws a word at you, you just got to come back. And once you let go, like they have this idea of happy fail. So it's a really good thing in life. Just do it and you learn from it and you don't beat yourself up over it. So I'd done that, but I wanted to sort of push myself a little bit more. And so I did this course with the School of Hard Knock Knocks, which is really good, a 5-day course. You sort of turn up on the Monday and Thursday, so 4-day course. You turn up on the Monday and the Thursday you're doing a live gig.
Wow.
And so I, again, just did it for, hey, I'm going to do it for fun. And my first, and I was lucky enough to have Richard Stubbs, a local, comedic legend here in Melbourne, was like our guest lecturer. And I just got up and did, it was like you're meant to do like 2 or 3 minutes of material and sort of prep it. And I'd actually been at a funeral that day, right? So I'd come from a funeral of my great auntie Kath, and then go there and like, I haven't got a bit. And so I just went into I'll just fly, I'll just make it up. And so I did this story and sort of weaved and I got off and Stubbsy goes, "It's good. You can see you could do an after dinner speech and sort of hold." He goes, "But stand-up needs a joke every 13 to 50 to 30 seconds. So it's got to be bang, bang, bang." And so, the 5 minutes that I ended up doing, and then I think I ended up doing 7 minutes at a International Comedy Festival show here in Melbourne, like it really forced me to write more and be more considered, to do all of those, to put it together. So it does help me because effectively when I'm doing keynote speaking, effectively you're doing bits on each slide. Like how do you make this memorable, whether you're throwing in a joke or the anecdote and how you're doing it. And so it did help that to tighten up that presentation, those presentation skills, and to go, well, how do I phrase that to potentially get a laugh. So it was something that I was always interested in. It was a bit of the bravado. I've seen people do it on telly. I can do that. And we'd been lucky enough to have Will Anderson on Beers Blokes Business, and he reached out and I said, "Can you come on?" And he took us through the business, like the business of comedy, which I find fascinating. Of booking out venues and how they've got to protect their content, but then also put their content out everywhere and building building a fan base. And a lot of it, I use some of the stuff that Will talks about, and we had Will at a Twitter brekkie. We ran some Twitter brekkies for Twitter before they came to Australia, and we sort of just invited everybody. And Will was one of the people on stage, and he said, "Look, it doesn't matter if I've got 250,000 Twitter followers. I just need 50,000 of them to come to one show a year for $50, right?" And I said, "That's pretty much everyone's strategy. Colin can have 1 million fans, but they want 100,000 to be members, but they want them to turn up. And so it's like, how can digital drive that?" So that's sort of that's my comedy story. But
that is amazing. Do people know that about you, like far and wide, the comedy part? Is that something that you have in your LinkedIn profile, like performer at the International Melbourne Comedy Festival?
I think, I do. I've sort of promoted it when it came out, and again, like I'm always looking at the business of of filling the seats, filling the stadium. So we talk about the cheeks and the seats, and so Maury, who runs the School of Hard Knock Knocks, like it's a pretty good system because you run the course, and then the members of the course have drag in the folks. So it's like, you invite all your mates to go see you either do well or bomb, but they're pretty much supportive. So it's a pretty good program. And he used to like me because I've got a lot of cousins and friends, and like I'd always drag people in because I'm a better marketer than I am a comedian.
Yep.
And so I always look at the business of comedy, and Melbourne International Comedy Festival is amazing, but then you also see, comedians hand out flyers. I'm like, guys, it's 2023, right? And then you're seeing, some comedians absolutely take off because they're killing a particular channel, whether it's, now it's TikTok, with Matt Rife, you can't go anywhere without seeing him. He's, sells a tour out like that. Alex Williamson did the same with his loose Aussie bloke stuff. And, people would follow him from Instagram. He would just drop a link. And so it's like, how do you, it's exactly the same game plan that sports do to say, hey, I'm teasing you with all this content. Hey, buy our league pass or become a member or get a ticket. So I spend a lot of time looking at other industries to say, because I can learn a lot by, what are the Boston Celtics and Real Madrids and Arsenal doing, but then also, what is Taylor Swift doing and how is she pushing, the boundaries and everything, and then what can you bring back and bring it back for you and your audience.
What you said about Will Anderson mentioning I only needed 50 people to buy, these $50 seats reminded me of Kevin Kelly's blog, 1,000 True Fans, and what you're talking about with digital has the potential for anyone with, even 10,000 following to make a living off that, because as the blog talks about, it's 100 people paying $100 a year. It's $100,000. You can live off that, and what you're doing kind of helps a lot of people follow that.
Yeah, and that's the bit that sort of getting down to, hey, you're producing this content, but who are you producing it for? Because if you're always trying to produce the content for everyone, right, the 7-year-old, 8-year-old, 14-year-old fan is very different from the 45, 55-year-old fan. And so if you're trying to get it to everybody, which I think is the main, issue, it's like, having every bit of content be for everybody, it's the quickest way to mediocrity. Whereas if you say, hey, we're going to do this stuff that's, younger and memeier and a bit quirky, that can live on those platforms like TikTok, knowing that the over 40s aren't on that platform. And so that's going to go more viral and better connect. And so it's a bit of understanding that. And even if not platforms, just, we're going to put this up. Why are we putting that up? Because there's a older demographic that wants all the details of what the day is, and so it goes on that platform. And the people who don't want it won't engage with it. The algorithm will sort it out for us. But you've got to understand that you're ticking those boxes and sort of the why, and knowing that one's not going to go have great analytics and stuff, but it's a hygiene thing, and you want to make sure that it's easy for those fans to get to it. And so it's a matter of training your fans to consume the right things. But I think there's a lot of value in doing that content specifically for that, or that specific audience or that audience demographic.
I'm loving the rabbit hole we've found ourselves in, but I want to come back to the podcast and find out, how do you get Mark Cuban on your show?
So one of the earliest things I did when I started Sports Geek, even pre-clients, I said, look, I'm going to go on a study trip. And so one, it's a great tax write-off, you call it a study trip. And so I went on effectively like a secret shopper mission to go and check out what's happening, because there's, you can consume what they're doing from a digital point of view, but I think what the US do really well is their activations and what they do in stadiums and those kind of things. So I said, I want to do that. And I went LA, Dallas, and New York. And so I was, hoping to, and I sort of said, hey, I'm doing this study trip. I'm Sports Geek. I want to meet up with Mark Cuban when I'm in Dallas. And so I'd done a bit of scouring. It's not hard. You can find Mark Cuban's email address eventually. It's because it's out on the internet. And so I emailed him and said, hey, I'd love to meet with you. Like I wasn't even doing a podcast at that stage, just to talk to you about what I'm doing. And he said, thanks, but no thanks. I don't have time during the season. I said, that's pretty cool. I don't normally get a reply from a billionaire. But the funny thing was I was in, and I hadn't made the network that I've got now. So I didn't know a lot of people. I was early on LinkedIn. So my IT career sort of set me up to know what LinkedIn can offer before anyone else to do it, because it was like, LinkedIn, that's where you go to when you've lost your job, and you go and tell everyone you've lost a job. That's pretty much what everyone was doing it. And so 5 or 6 years earlier, I was running a department, like I said, at AGL, of 80 people, And we're going through the really ugly part of getting outsourced. So everyone eventually is going to lose their jobs, which is ugly. And so there's some people waiting to get their payout and other people like, And so I went around to my whole department and said, everyone get on LinkedIn. They're like, why? I said, well, if you're all connected now, we don't know where we are in 3 years' time. And you'll be able to refer to people. You'll all be in different parts of the industry. It'll be really good. And so I said, you shouldn't have to have a resume. You can just point people, look at all this and who I've got. So I'd done a lot of that work in my IT job. And so it worked quite well when I went to the States and sort of said, hey, this is me. I'm doing this. And the US folk are probably more open to networking than Australians at that point. It's probably evening up now. So I was at Dodger Stadium for a baseball game, posting, tweeting out, putting hipstermatic filters on back when you had to do that and they weren't available on Instagram. And I got a random reply from Jill Dott. She said, you should come back for a game because I was just doing a stadium tour. I said, I'd love to. And so we were chatting and I'd never met her before. And so we were chatting and then we realised we're both going to be in Dallas at the same time. And then part of my also strategy to get to Dallas was go to a Mavs game. So there was a Mavs-Lakers game there. And it also connected with the CEO of the Mavs Stadium, American Airlines Centre, Brad Main. And so got my tickets. I'm sitting, 15 rows behind the Mavs bench. I'm still being bold. I'm like, hey, Mark Cuban, this is where I'm going to be sitting. If you want to come and say hello, I'm more than happy to. And Jill's like, Jill was at the game. She goes, I'm going to be at the game as well. I said, how awesome is this? I hadn't met her 3 days earlier. And so halfway through the second quarter, I get a tap on the shoulder and there's Brad Main, the CEO of the arena. He goes, hey, Sean, how you doing? I said, I'm good. He said, you want to come up to the suite? I said, awesome. I was already chatting to the guy next to me. He goes, you've got to go. They're going to have food up there. Awesome. And so, again, just by tweeting and, so I got taken up into the suite and he's introduced me and he's introduced me all these people in the stadium space. And he goes, oh, by the way, this is Jill. So Jill was in the box with Brad. They did not know that I was talking to both of them. And she's like, you should talk to Sean. So, so I got to see Dirk Nowitzki's, I think, 25,000 point, I think, at that point, at the night. Brad goes, we've got a bucket of Fosters here for you. I said, Brad, I'll be very polite. I'll drink them all, but Australians don't drink Fosters. Right? And so I met up with Brad, came back the next night and he gave me a tour during the Stars game. And, there was a goal while I was in the booth and he let me press the button for the hooter, for the siren, for the...
That's fantastic.
So it was literally just, hustling, reaching out on LinkedIn, tweeting people. Again, while they were still active in that space, I don't know if I'd be able to do it now, but it was just amazing. Tweeting with Jill 2 days earlier, and then me tweeting Brad, and then them making the connection, and then she saying, "Oh no, get Sean up here. He's doing this tour," and so it's like all of those things didn't happen. So that was the precursor, and then it's a long way to get to the Mark Cuban story, and then I started doing the podcast and. I still had his email, and so I'd done about 60 episodes, and so I'd had Arsenal and that on, and he was out there promoting Cyberdust. You ever heard of Cyberdust?
No, never.
Yeah, so it's nowhere anywhere now, but it was effectively his, because there was this whole problem of messages and people saving messages and security, and so Cyberdust was effectively disappearing messages, right? So you send a message, it's gone, and so he was plugging it as a way for protect athletes and how athletes can go. And so I saw that I got on I always get on new tools quickly just to test them out. Is it worthwhile? I'm looking at, should I be telling one of my teams to get on this new platform? And so he's there plugging it. And so I went on Cyberdust and saw him active. And so I messaged him and said, hey, Mark, I'd love to talk about Cyberdust and how sports can use it and athletes can use it. And he replies back. And so then I'm like, I've nearly got him. And I said, I'd love to have you on the podcast. I've just listed, Arsenal and a few of the bigger team names that have been on and pointed him to it. And then I went on Twitter and I queued up a bunch of my mates to say, hey, should we get Mark, about to get him in there? And before I'd even deployed everyone to say, hey, Mark, you should do the podcast, he replied back, said, no problems when you want to do it. And so I'm like, awesome. And
amazing.
And then it was Scott Kilmartin. He goes, "Oh, that's really great." He goes, "What happens if your Skype fails?" I said, "Thanks, Scott. Like that's that's what you want, not a pat on the back." And so I ended up pulling in some favours, and I did it out of the ABC Grandstand studio. And so it was quite
just to make sure everything went
just
perfectly.
To make sure everything went perfect. But it was quite interesting because you could sort of I've listened to it a couple of times, but early on he just thought he was going to get some softball like talk about stuff, and I just went, "No, I'm in now, and I'm just going to keep throwing punches." And so, like, I was talking to him about a lot of the US folks are now not calling it season ticket members and talking membership, right? Which is really strong concept here in Australia, especially here in Melbourne. And I sort of asked him about that. I said, "What do you think about calling them members, making them feel like they're members of the club?" And so he was like liking the idea, and we talked about the NBA, playing games in China and those kind of things. So. Yeah, we sort of just went, I just went, "Oh, I'm here now. I've got you for 40 minutes. If you're having fun, I'm having fun." So it was absolute blast. And he gave as good as he got. And so, it was really good. I joked, I still joke, Mark Cuban's a sports geek like me. He's just got more money. But it was a lot of fun.
Amazing. One of the things I really admire about your journey, particularly from the sports geek point onwards, is how it seems as though you guys have been global since day one. You're in Australia, but you're dealing with clients right around the world. And that's led you to now working with the NFL and some of their expansion into Australia. Can you tell us a bit about what you're doing with them?
Yeah, I think the thing is, for me, like pre-COVID, I was actually planning like a West Coast US trip to do some workshops. And I'd been lucky enough to do some, work with different US teams, did stuff with the Timberwolves. Like I said, I did some stuff with the Washington NFL team when they were called another thing. And so I got a call from a podcast guest, Andrew Collins, who ran Mailman out of China. And so they do a lot of work in helping sports get into other markets. So they do a lot of work in China in doing localized content. And so he called and said, "One, do you have capacity?" And I always answer yes to that. And he said, "Oh, we need some representation for the NFL in Australia because they were getting some of the other markets as the NFL were ramping up." I said, no problems. And so we effectively it's our third season now. So a week before the season, I said, "Here's the handles, here's the Twitter handle, and here's the Instagram handle, and here's all the tools." And so the cool thing was we get to use, we're the league. So normally when you're in a team world and, what are the restrictions? What can you use and what can't you use and what can you do? And so it's I'm like, so we're the league, yeah? So we can do whatever we want, yeah? And pretty much it was, yeah. So I was reporting to the international office in LA, and it was like the main remit was grow the audience and get people to watch it,
wow.
On a Monday. And so we were lucky enough that I was familiar with like WSC, so they've got a really great clipping tool. And so I had a Viv on my podcast when he was in Melbourne. And so for those who don't know, Clip Pro is WSC is a Israeli startup that uses machine learning and AI and all the stats to be able to automatically create a highlight from vision from the TV. And so
we had them at Cricket Australia, and I heard they were taking like the technology out of like military equipment.
So they come from a military background. And so when I interviewed Aviv, they were trying to figure out what were the rules for cricket, right? And so they'd had early success with the NBA. And so it does things like it has the stats feed coming in, so it knows when a touchdown happens or knows when a run out happens or knows when a 3-point happens. But then they also gauge the commentary and like the volume of the commentary in the crowd to come up with a rating for the clip. And then it's also how do they trim the clip appropriately. So it's like, for a touchdown, you want to get the touchdown, but you also want to get to the celebration, or Steph Curry hits a 3. The video's no good if you don't see him do the shimmy or something afterwards. So they tweaked that. So I went, so we can use all that? And they go, yeah. And so I just went back into geek mode and go, I'm just going to automate the hell out of this. And so, so I went, if an Australian does anything, like I don't need to rate if an Australian does anything, I just want a clip of that and it automatically gets into our Slack. And so we can quickly get it up. And it's already got the brand on it and all those kind of things. And so we're able to do that as well as the hygiene stuff, which is, hey, this is when the games are on. These are the games you can tune in on 7. And so that was really welcomed by, the audience who were like, I never know, we're on this week, or I don't have ESPN so I can watch it, or I didn't realise I can get Game Pass, those kind of things. So we did a lot of that. It's a unique challenge sort of doing the content in an English-speaking, country, because the agencies that are working in France and Mexico and in Germany, a lot of their stuff is, we're translating this and we're taking what the NFL team is doing and putting to translation. Not to diminish what they're doing killer jobs. But if you're an NFL fan in Australia, you probably don't know about the NFL AUNZ accounts, right? Because you're following NFL and you're following OBJ and you're following all the ESPN accounts. And so you could probably get your fill. And so it's like what we had to do is sort of do digital to dollars over it and say, what do we want to get? And like, well, I know what the diehard avid fans are that get up at 3 a.m. in the morning to watch the NFL. Like we know who they are and what they like. But what we want to do is how do we get the people who just start tuning in after Christmas, that start tuning in when the playoffs start heating up? How do we connect with them? How do we get someone that's going to get up to watch Boxing Day to get up a little bit earlier and watch some games? Those kind of things. So we sort of had to keep that. And then how do we have an Aussie angle? How do we get that? There's luckily enough, there's a bunch of punters that are in the league, and so anytime they love getting around them. And then we've got stars like Jordan Mailata playing for the Philadelphia Eagles, who is very charismatic and so talented. Like he's been on The Masked Singer, and he's now got his second Christmas album out. So leveraging that content's been fun. Now there's now Charlotte is here as GM of Australia New Zealand, so. Effectively, I like to think that we helped in proving the case of Australia is a really worthwhile market for the NFL. Because we've got great partners in Channel 7 are showing it all, and ESPN are showing it all. So, the amount of people that either get into it right away, or the footy, AFL, NRL stops, and then they lean in a bit further. Like, what do I get? And so it's a really easy sport to consume because you can sort of dedicate your Monday. Like I love my NBA, but it's every single day, whereas NFL, you can sort of go, getting in my Monday, figure out who's won, and then sort of it frees up your week a little bit. So it's growing every year.
It's amazing hearing the journey that you've been on. I'm guessing when you were thinking about quitting your developer training job, 13 years ago, you might not have imagined working with the NFL today, which I believe is the most lucrative sport in the world in terms of dollars per match played. I think
there's a lot of money in the NFL. Like their TV deals, the scale of the business overall. Like I was lucky enough to go to the NFL draft this year in Kansas City, and just for context, it's a Thursday night prime time, going up against NBA playoffs, and the NFL draft blitzed it.
Jeez.
And there was 100,000 people there over the every day for 3 days. So 300,000 people were there, which is effectively a job fair, like finding someone to get a job, and celebrating that. But again, no sport does it as big as the NFL, and it was really great sort of connecting with the social team, Josh, who was at the Dodgers, and I did a podcast with him at the SCG when the MLB came out, and he was working with the NFL social team. So looking at what they were doing with the draft picks, and then doing some interviews with draft picks, and interviewing the crazy fans that turn up, the spectacle and everything around it. It's amazing. Like the scale is just something that's hard for people as Australian to understand. But it's also, a real big opportunity that it's going to keep growing, and the fact that the NFL has sort of shoehorned their way into the Olympics in 2028 with flag football, it could be like their dream team moment if they really do go, we're going to let Patrick Mahomes play flag football in the Olympics, which it makes sense that they would do it. It might really explode the sport in all parts of the world.
Incredible. I've got one more question for you before we wrap up. And with all the challenges that come with running your own business, you mentioned your interest in the book Shoe Dog at the top of the episode and how you've listened to it a number of times. Is there anything in particular that you resonate most with in that book, or that gives you inspiration, that just, keeps you going a bit longer through all the hurdles that come with, running a business?
I think it's the resilience. I think if I mention the other book that I would mention is Angela Duckworth's book Grit, and it's all about resilience and pushing through, and what is grit and how do you get it? Is it earned or? And I sort of learnt in early part of Sports Geek, it was just like, just keep going, and sort of staying the course, and having, luckily enough, having some wins, whether it's, getting a, Collingwood and a Manly and the Rabbitohs on board as a sort of Adelaide Crows as early clients, to, speaking and those things. And again, the early podcast, like you said, the stats, most people don't get past 10. And so I was like, well, let's just get past 10. And then to have some of those anecdotes, like podcast is a strange medium. I mean, I know you're sort of doing the video, but a lot of people are consuming it audio. And so they're either now out on a run in the gym or on the treadmill, or, maybe they're on their commute. And so they're not overly active as, hey, I'm going to respond. So if you haven't, send Ruben and Ryan a message that you listen to the podcast, because it's always good to get those messages and that feedback. I mean, you've got your download stats and things like that, but it is good to get that feedback to sort of know that people are there. So for me, grit is one of the things that keeps me going, and is why I'm still in business, I guess.
Amazing. Well, it's been incredible learning about your journey over 13 plus years, and I know your podcast has been a great inspiration to myself, and even when I was getting started as a digital commercial specialist at Cricket Australia, listening to some of the interviews just helped me upskill and communicate and understand that language that you talk about as well. So thank you for coming on and sharing your journey, and thank you for the service that you're doing to the sports industry as well, and trying to help everyone build that digital maturity. It's been awesome to chat all things digital and commercial with you.
No problems, and it won't stop here, because this will be a crossover episode. No, we haven't figured out the planning, but we are going to have a chat, and we're going to reverse the roles and have a chat with you. So hopefully everyone who's listened to this will go over to the Sports Geek feed and listen to the other side of the conversation.
Wonderful. Thanks, Sean.
Guys, it's time now for the people segment of the podcast, Ask SportsGrad, where every week we answer a question directly from our community. If you'd like to ask a question, well, become a member tomorrow. You can join and ask us any questions. We'll answer them on the podcast, and also our friends in our community as well. Rubes, this one comes from a couple of members actually, because they've been going for some interviews lately. So we're going to put an interview theme on this one. And the question is, do you have any advice on how to best prepare for an interview? Should I try and reach out to someone in a similar position and be asking for help on my interview?
Okay, awesome. Great question. Kind of two parts to that question. So let's tackle the second one first, in terms of should I reach out to someone in a similar position and ask for help? Yes, absolutely. Because if someone's been through the interview process at the organisation you're applying for before, then they might be able to share with you what are the questions that they asked you, who was in the room. You might be able to look them up on LinkedIn in advance and get some information before you walk into the room, which always helps you feel a lot more confident and helps you prepare what to say as well. For example, when I applied for my job at Cricket Australia, I had a pre-existing relationship with a guy called Joel Morrison. Before I went to my interview, I called up Joel. He spent 45 minutes on the phone with me, and he said, Ruben, you need to prepare for these things. And that led me to ultimately being successful in the interview. So yes, definitely reach out and ask for help where you can. In terms of best advice to prepare for an interview, well, there's kind of two things to understand when you're preparing for an interview, and that is, one, what is the organisation looking for? So what things do you really need to hit on the head to make sure that you are satisfying their needs? And then secondly, how do you say that in the most compelling way? So let's start with the first one. How do you make sure you're answering all the things that address their needs? First, it comes from a deep understanding of the organisation, who they are, what their goals are. So a lot of that information will be on the job description, and one thing you want to do is go through and dissect the job description. So you want to pull it apart and find out what are the top skill priorities that this job is looking for, and the top character priorities that this job is looking for, and literally rank them 1 to 5 or however many come up. So then you can start to think about, all right, if the number one skill priority for this job is communication, then you can start to think about, well, what are my top communication examples? And that leads me to part 2, which is how do you say what you need to say in the most compelling way? Now, this is where you can introduce frameworks to how you give your interview answer. And a very, very easy one to use is the STAR framework. So that stands for situation, task, action, result. So for example, if you had an example where you've used strong communication in the past, you would then run it through the STAR formula and to give your answer. So let's say you use strong communication when you're working in a team. And so for me, I might use it, if I was applying for my job at Cricket Australia and the topic of communication came up, I might say that let's start with the situation. In my role as president of the Deakin University Sport Society, it was my task to lead a team and grow the membership of this organisation to help our peers get jobs in the sports industry. So the action related to communication might be something like, as a part of this, it was my responsibility to make sure that everyone on the committee understand what we were working towards and what they needed to do each week, each month, or before each event. So then you could go into, that's the task. Then you go into the action. What did you do? So to make sure everyone was clearly across what we need to do, and I communicated that to them, I would make sure that I would prepare in advance. What are we working on? What are the key things that people need to understand? And then I would deliver it to them in our meeting. And then I might follow up with an email just in case anybody forgot to say, hey, here are the top 3 things that we're working on this week. And then you go into the results part, which is, as a result, the team clearly understood their task that we needed to do. Everyone was able to do it, and which led us to running a smooth event for 50 people, which generated, $1,000 of income for the club. Something like that. So first, understand the needs of the organisation, and then find your best example and turn it into a STAR response.
Love that. I think with this as well, at the end of the day, it just requires time and a little bit of effort to put these examples together. You could go into it and wing it and have a crack at that. But if you put in some time to really identify some key areas that you've done certain things and you've got these stories lined up around what you've done, it's gonna save you so much time. So yes, it's like a little bit of a process. It's hardly a process. It's pretty simple. But if you put in that time, you've got these examples for the rest of your time. So just get to work and understand yourself. I think that's the biggest thing. And an example for me as well, Rubes, like when I went for my partnerships secondment when I was at Cricket Australia, I got in touch with one of the account managers, Lena Staropoli, podcast royalty, previous guest.
Episode 24.
And picked her brain on what the role is, what it's about, what they're looking for, what the hardest parts of the job are, like what it looks like. And I think that really helped me understand the role a bit better. So if you've got those connections and you're able to speak to people inside, it cuts that process in half of actually understanding the role. So I'd absolutely try and reach out to people before you go for a role.
Wonderful.
Brilliant. Great question. Well, if you'd like to ask us a question, as I said at just now, sign up and become a member tomorrow. Our next intake is open at 9 a.m. So we said crack of dawn. It kind of is the crack of dawn, but 9 a.m. So do not miss your chance. There's limited positions. Otherwise, you'll miss out until late Feb in 2024. So don't start your year in late Feb. Start it on January 1st or on November 28th. In the meantime, find us on LinkedIn. And if you know anyone who would enjoy the show, please send it on to them and give us some love with a rating if you enjoy the show. Subscribe on Apple or follow on Spotify. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
Hey guys, one last thing before you go. If you'd enjoy a quick email from us each Friday on all the latest job openings, networking events, Q&As with industry professionals and latest podcast episodes, then subscribe to the SportsGrad newsletter. Head to our website, www.sportsgrad.com.au/newsletter to subscribe. There's also a link in our show notes to join.